Welcome, dear listener, to another peaceful night. Let your breath settle into a gentle rhythm, soft and steady as you prepare to rest. Tonight, we are surrounded by warmth, a sense of safety, and the stillness of the world around us. As you settle in, take a deep breath and allow yourself to let go of any tension. With each breath, feel your body relax more deeply. Tonight, we journey into the story of Ruth, a tale of loyalty, faith, and the quiet strength of a woman who chose to follow love even in the face of hardship. Her story is one of devotion, trust in God, and the remarkable bond shared between Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. As we unfold this peaceful narrative, let the stillness embrace you and allow the gentle rhythms of the story to carry you toward restful sleep. In the land of Moab, many years ago, there lived a woman named Ruth. Ruth came from a place far away from Bethlehem, from a foreign land, but she had made her life in Moab with her husband, Mahlon. They had lived together for some time, sharing a life filled with love and companionship. But sorrow struck, and Ruth's world changed forever when her husband passed away. Suddenly, Ruth found herself alone, without her beloved husband, in a world full of uncertainty and sorrow. Beside her was Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law. Naomi's life had also been filled with deep loss. She had lost her husband Elimelech years before, and now both of her sons, Mahlon and Chilion, were gone as well. Naomi, left with nothing but her grief and the company of Ruth, found herself in a sorrowful state. She was a woman without her family, a stranger in a foreign land. Naomi's heart was heavy with the loss of her loved ones, and she longed for her homeland of Bethlehem, where she could return to her roots. One day, Naomi decided that it was time to return home. She had heard that there was food in Bethlehem once again, and the thought of returning to her people, even though they too had changed, gave her some comfort. But Naomi knew that she could not ask Ruth to come with her. Ruth was still young, and the path ahead was uncertain, filled with hardships. Naomi knew it would be better for Ruth to return to her own people, where she could remarry and find happiness again. Naomi spoke gently to Ruth, urging her to go back to her family. "Your sister-in-law has returned to her people and to her gods," Naomi said. "Go back with her." Naomi knew that Ruth deserved a life of her own, a chance to find joy again, and she could not ask Ruth to stay in a foreign land with no prospects. But Ruth's heart was full of love, and her loyalty to Naomi was stronger than any words of reason. Ruth did not want to leave Naomi alone. Ruth could not bear to think of Naomi walking through life without her by her side. "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you," Ruth replied. "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." These words, spoken with a quiet but unwavering voice, were a promise, one of deep devotion and commitment. Ruth was not just choosing to stay with Naomi, she was choosing Naomi's people, Naomi's land, and above all, Naomi's God. It was a decision that bound Ruth to Naomi in a way that no one could have imagined. Ruth's heart was set, and with that vow, Ruth and Naomi began their journey back to Bethlehem, leaving behind everything they knew. The road ahead was uncertain. The journey would not be easy, but Ruth's faith in God and in her decision to stay by Naomi's side carried her through. Ruth had chosen a life of loyalty, one that was rooted in love, and she was ready to face whatever came next with Naomi by her side. The hardships they would face together would not be easy, but Ruth's heart was steadfast. She had made her choice, and she would walk it with Naomi, come what may. After a long and weary journey, Ruth and Naomi finally arrived in Bethlehem. The city was quiet, with the evening sun casting long shadows over the hills. The streets were narrow, winding their way between stone houses and old marketplaces. As the two women walked into town, the weight of the journey hung on them, and the air was crisp and cool against their faces. Naomi had once called this place home, but now it felt so distant, as though time had somehow shifted in the years that had passed. As they made their way through the town's gates, they were met with curious stares. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and soon a group of townspeople gathered around them. They recognized Naomi immediately, though she had changed in ways they hadn't expected. Her once vibrant face, now etched with sorrow, was a reminder of the years that had passed. The lively woman they had known seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone who bore the weight of grief on her shoulders. "Is this Naomi?" the people asked, their voices filled with surprise. Naomi, looking weary and drained, stopped for a moment and turned toward them. Her heart felt heavy. The years of loss, too much to bear. The memories of the time when she had left Bethlehem, full of hope and promise, came rushing back. She had left with her husband Elimelech and her two sons Mahlon and Chilion, only to return now with nothing but Ruth at her side. Naomi gave a slight sad smile, but the sorrow in her eyes was unmistakable. "Don't call me Naomi," she replied quietly. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Her words were heavy with grief. Naomi's once bright spirit had been dimmed by the weight of her losses. She had lost her husband, her sons, and now it seemed her sense of joy had been taken as well. The people of Bethlehem, hearing her words, fell silent. They could feel the depth of her pain, the loss that had shaped her into a woman who no longer recognized herself. As the townspeople looked at Naomi, they also saw Ruth standing quietly beside her. Ruth was not from Bethlehem. She was a foreigner, a widow, a stranger in the land. Yet, she had chosen to follow Naomi, not because she had to, but because of the deep love and loyalty she felt for her mother-in-law. Ruth's presence was a quiet contrast to Naomi's sorrow. Where Naomi's grief seemed to take up all the space, Ruth's calm and steady presence seemed to be the one thing that remained unchanged. Naomi, her heart aching with sadness, turned to Ruth, her eyes full of gratitude. Ruth had not left her side, even though Naomi had told her to go back to her own family. Naomi could not bear the thought of being alone, so Ruth's loyalty meant more than words could express. Naomi had tried to send Ruth away, but Ruth had refused. "Where you go, I will go," Ruth had said, and Naomi knew that Ruth's faithfulness was something rare and precious. The people of Bethlehem saw this bond between the two women and quietly spoke among themselves. "Who is this woman?" they asked. "She has come with Naomi. She is her daughter-in-law, though not from here." And in the silence, they recognized something remarkable. Ruth's devotion to Naomi was something to be admired. It was a bond that defied the odds, a testament to love and loyalty. Ruth had chosen to leave her homeland, family and her familiar life behind. She had chosen to walk this uncertain path with Naomi, and she did so without hesitation, without regret. The journey ahead would not be easy, but Ruth's heart was determined. She would face whatever challenges lay ahead as long as she could stand by Naomi's side. Though Naomi's heart was heavy with grief, she found comfort in Ruth's presence. Naomi had returned to Bethlehem empty in the worldly sense, but Ruth's love filled the emptiness in a way that nothing else could. As the two women stood together in the town of Bethlehem, the weight of their journey seemed to lessen, if only slightly. Together, they would face whatever came next, and that, Naomi realized, was a gift she could never have imagined. The days in Bethlehem were not easy for Naomi and Ruth. They had returned at the time of the barley harvest, when the fields were full of golden grain, but they had little to their name. Naomi, though blessed with Ruth's companionship, still felt the weight of her grief and the uncertainty of their future. They had no wealth, no home of their own, and no way to provide for themselves. Ruth, however, was determined to make the best of their situation. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the fields, Ruth approached Naomi with a proposal. "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor in," Ruth said. "I will go to the fields and work so we can have something to eat." Naomi, still burdened with sorrow, nodded in agreement. "Go, my daughter," she said, though her voice was weary. Naomi knew that Ruth's faithfulness extended beyond just her physical presence. It was a loyalty that could not be shaken. She trusted Ruth to take the first step toward providing for them. Ruth set off toward the fields that morning, her heart full of purpose and determination. She didn't know which field she would end up in, nor did she know the people who worked there, but she trusted that the Lord would guide her. She arrived at a field owned by a man named Boaz, a relative of Naomi's deceased husband. Ruth had no knowledge of Boaz's connection to Naomi, but she worked diligently, gathering whatever was left behind by the harvesters. Boaz had heard of Ruth's dedication to Naomi. He had learned of her story, the way she had left her own people to care for Naomi, the way she had chosen to live a life of loyalty to a woman who had nothing left to give. When Boaz saw Ruth in his field, gathering the remnants of the harvest, he was moved by her humility and her faithfulness. Boaz approached her and asked, "Who is that woman working in the field?" His servants told him that it was Ruth, the Moabite woman who had returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. Boaz was impressed by her, not only because of her reputation, but because she had come to the field and worked tirelessly without asking for help. Boaz, feeling a sense of kindness toward her, called Ruth over to him. "Don't go and glean in another field," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "Stay here with my servants and work. I have told the men not to touch you, and when you are thirsty, drink from the jars the men have filled." Ruth, taken aback by his kindness, bowed her head in gratitude. "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me? A foreigner?" she asked, her voice filled with humility. Boaz smiled and said, "I have heard all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland to come to a people you did not know. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth, deeply touched by Boaz's words, responded humbly, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord?" Her heart was filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She had not expected such kindness, especially from someone she had never met. Ruth, who had come to Bethlehem as a stranger, was beginning to feel the warmth of a new community, one that saw her not for her origins, but for her actions and her heart. The rest of the day passed with Ruth working in Boaz's fields, gathering grain and feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Boaz made sure that she was well taken care of, offering her extra grain to take back to Naomi. Ruth worked late into the evening, and when the day's labor was done, she carried her bundle of grain back home to Naomi. When Naomi saw the amount of grain Ruth had gathered, her eyes widened in surprise. "Where did you glean today?" she asked, astonished at the abundance Ruth had brought home. "Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth, with a smile, told Naomi about Boaz and his kindness. She explained how Boaz had invited her to stay and work in his fields. Naomi's face softened, and for the first time in a long while, a flicker of hope began to stir in her heart. "Boaz is one of our kinsman redeemers," Naomi said, her voice filled with a quiet realization. "He is a man of kindness, and he has shown favor to you. Ruth, my daughter, you have found favor in the right place." Naomi's words gave Ruth a sense of peace, and as she sat down to share the meal with Naomi, there was a new sense of warmth in their home. Ruth had found favor in Boaz's eyes, but more importantly, she had found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and with that favor, a new chapter of their lives was beginning, one filled with hope and the promise of a future they had not dared to dream of. As the days passed, Ruth continued to glean in Boaz's fields, and each day brought new hope and possibility. Naomi, though still grieving, began to see a glimmer of light in their situation. The kindness Boaz had shown to Ruth was not something that could be ignored. Naomi recognized that Boaz's generosity was more than just a casual act of charity. It was a sign of something deeper. One evening, as Ruth came home with another bundle of grain, Naomi took a deep breath, her mind racing with a plan. She had been thinking about Boaz and his kindness for days, and a quiet thought began to take shape in her heart. Naomi knew that Boaz was a kinsman redeemer, someone who could restore the family's name and property. According to the customs of the time, if a man died without leaving an heir, his relative could marry the widow to preserve the family line. Naomi realized that this was their opportunity. If Ruth could marry Boaz, it would secure their future and restore their family's place in Bethlehem. Naomi called Ruth to her side one evening after dinner. "My daughter," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency, "I have a plan. Tonight, you will go to the threshing floor where Boaz will be winnowing barley. After he has finished eating and drinking, he will lie down to sleep. You must go to him, uncover his feet, and lie down. He will tell you what to do." Ruth looked at Naomi, her face uncertain but willing. "I will do whatever you say," she replied with a quiet trust. Ruth had followed Naomi's guidance every step of the way since they had arrived in Bethlehem, and she had come to trust her mother-in-law's wisdom. Naomi's plan was bold, but Ruth felt a deep sense of peace in her heart. She trusted that Naomi was leading her towards something important, even if it was uncertain. That night, Ruth prepared herself carefully. She bathed and put on her best clothes, the ones that would make her look respectable and worthy of Boaz's attention. Then she quietly made her way to the threshing floor under the cover of darkness. The moon shone softly above, casting pale light over the field where Boaz had been working earlier in the day. As Ruth approached the threshing floor, she saw Boaz lying down, his head resting on a pillow of grain and his feet uncovered. The sound of the wind rustling through the grain stalks was the only noise around her as she crept forward. Her heart raced in her chest, but she knew that this was the moment when everything could change. With great care, Ruth approached Boaz's feet, and just as Naomi had instructed, she uncovered them. Then she lay down at his feet, waiting. The minutes stretched on, and Ruth's mind raced with questions. Would Boaz accept her offer? Would he understand what she was asking? After some time, Boaz stirred. He awoke to find someone lying at his feet. Startled, he asked, "Who are you?" Ruth, her voice steady but filled with a quiet reverence, replied, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread the corner of your garment over me, for you are a kinsman redeemer." Boaz, still waking from his sleep, looked down at her in astonishment. In an instant, he understood. Ruth had made a bold, daring request. She was asking him to marry her, to take on the role of a kinsman redeemer and restore her family. This was a moment that would change the course of their lives, a moment filled with promise and potential. Boaz looked at Ruth with kindness and admiration. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he said. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Ruth, hearing his words, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Boaz was not only willing to help her, but he was moved by the sincerity of her request. He knew that Ruth was a woman of honor and integrity, someone worthy of respect. In that moment, Ruth's heart was full of gratitude. She had placed her trust in Boaz, and now her trust had been rewarded. Boaz continued, "Although it is true that I am a kinsman redeemer, there is another who is a closer relative than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he is willing to do the part of a kinsman redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." Ruth, feeling a deep sense of peace, nodded. "I will do as you say," she replied softly. And so, Ruth remained at Boaz's feet through the night, knowing that whatever happened, she had taken the right step. She had trusted in Naomi's wisdom, and now she had trusted in Boaz's honor. As the night passed, Ruth felt a sense of calm. The uncertainty that had plagued her for so long had begun to fade, replaced by a sense of hope and anticipation. Whatever the future held, she knew that she was no longer alone. The dawn broke quietly over the hills of Bethlehem, casting a soft glow across the fields where Ruth had spent the night. The stillness of the morning mirrored the calm that Ruth felt within her. The uncertainty of the previous days was now replaced by the quiet hope that perhaps, just perhaps, everything was beginning to fall into place. As the sun rose higher, Ruth rose as well, careful not to disturb Boaz. She gathered her shawl around her shoulders and waited for him to awaken. When Boaz stirred, he looked at her, his face showing signs of both weariness and warmth. He smiled kindly at Ruth, the bond between them strengthening with each passing moment. "Let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor," Boaz instructed, his voice gentle but firm. He wanted to ensure that Ruth's actions were not misunderstood. In a time when propriety and reputation mattered greatly, Boaz knew how important it was to protect both Ruth's and his own honor. Ruth nodded in understanding, and before she left, Boaz took 6 measures of barley, enough to provide sustenance for Naomi and herself, and placed them in her shawl. "Take this gift to Naomi," he said. "It is a sign that I have not forgotten you." Ruth, overwhelmed by his kindness, thanked Boaz and made her way back home. The walk back to Naomi's house seemed shorter than it had the day before, as Ruth's heart was full of anticipation and gratitude. She couldn't wait to tell Naomi everything that had transpired, the hope she had been carrying so quietly now blossoming into something more. When Ruth arrived at Naomi's house, Naomi eagerly awaited her return. "How did it go, my daughter?" she asked, her voice filled with both curiosity and concern. Ruth carefully set down the barley and told Naomi everything. The moment she had approached Boaz on the threshing floor, her bold request, and Boaz's response. Naomi listened intently, her eyes reflecting both the depth of Ruth's words and the wisdom she had gained over the years. When Ruth finished telling her the story, Naomi let out a long, thoughtful sigh. She knew that Boaz's words were significant. He had promised to do what was right and to seek out the closer relative who had the first right to redeem Ruth. "Wait, my daughter," Naomi said softly, "until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Naomi's words were full of confidence, and Ruth, though anxious, trusted in her mother-in-law's wisdom. The time had come for the next step, and now all they could do was wait. Later that day, Boaz went to the town gate where legal matters were settled. He knew that the time had come to ensure that the rights of the Redeemer were honored. As he stood at the gate, he saw the closer relative who had the first right to redeem Naomi's family's land and Ruth. Boaz called him over, along with 10 of the elders of the town, to witness the matter. "Come over here, friend," Boaz said to the closer relative. "Sit down." The relative approached, and Boaz motioned for the elders to sit. Once everyone was gathered, Boaz laid out the situation. "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech," he began. "I thought I should bring the matter to you and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these witnesses. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to redeem it except you, and I am next in line." The relative, hearing of the land's availability, initially responded with interest. "I will redeem it," he said. But then Boaz added, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the deceased, in order to maintain the name of the deceased with his property." At this, the relative's face changed. He had not anticipated the second part of the arrangement. Redeeming the land was one thing, but marrying Ruth and raising up children in the name of her deceased husband was a responsibility that he was not willing to take on. "I cannot redeem it," the relative replied, his voice strained, "because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Boaz, with a quiet sense of relief, nodded. He had known that this was the moment when everything could change. With the relative's refusal, the right to redeem Ruth and the land now fell to him. In front of the elders and all the people at the gate, Boaz declared, "Today I am redeeming all that belonged to Elimelech and his family. I will marry Ruth the Moabite, to restore the name of the deceased. The land, the name, and the family will be preserved. The elders and the people at the gate witnessed this declaration, and they blessed Boaz. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel, they said. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. As the elders spoke their blessings, Boaz's heart was full. This moment, though simple, was filled with great meaning. He had redeemed the land and the family. He had taken Ruth as his wife, and together they would restore the name of Elimelech and bring hope to Naomi in her old age. And so, with the blessings of the people and the elders, the stage was set for the new chapter in Ruth and Boaz's lives, a chapter that would shape not only their future, but also the future of the nation of Israel. As the days turned to weeks and the seasons began to change, Ruth and Boaz settled into a life of quiet happiness. Their marriage was a beautiful blend of love and purpose, for they both knew that they were not just building a life for themselves, they were fulfilling a greater plan. In time, Ruth became pregnant, and the town of Bethlehem buzzed with excitement. The once childless widow had found a place of belonging, and the barren woman was now carrying the promise of a future. Ruth and Boaz's union had not only restored their family's name, but had also opened the door to a new chapter of hope. When the time came for Ruth to give birth, she was surrounded by the warmth and love of her new family. Naomi, who had once been bitter and sorrowful, was now filled with joy and anticipation as she prepared to welcome the child into the world. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Ruth, offering their congratulations and support. And then, in the quiet of the night, a child was born, a son, a beautiful baby boy who would carry the name of his grandfather, Elimelech. Ruth held the child in her arms, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. Boaz, standing beside her, looked at his son with a tenderness that only a father could know. The child, named Obed, was a symbol of redemption and restoration, a new beginning for a family that had once been lost in the depths of grief. Naomi, who had been silently watching, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. She took the child from Ruth's arms and cradled him to her chest. The women who had once known Naomi as a woman of sorrow now saw her joy, her deep joy that was brighter than any grief she had known before. "Praise be to the Lord," Naomi whispered, her voice full of wonder. "He has not left me without a redeemer. He has given me this child, and he will bring me rest and peace in my old age." The women of the town rejoiced with Naomi, seeing how the Lord had worked in her life. "A son has been born to Naomi," they said, and they named the child Obed, for he was the one who had brought Naomi back from her bitterness and sorrow. In the years that followed, Obed grew and flourished under the care of Ruth and Boaz. As he grew, it became clear that the child was more than just a blessing for Naomi and her family. He was a part of a greater story, one that would stretch across generations. For Obed would become the father of Jesse, and Jesse would become the father of David, and David, the young shepherd boy who had once watched over the sheep on the hillsides of Bethlehem, would rise to become the greatest king in Israel's history. Through David, the promises of God would unfold, leading to the birth of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. The story of Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi is more than a tale of redemption for one family. It is a part of the larger narrative of God's plan for humanity, a story that begins with love, faith, and hope, and stretches across centuries to bring about the birth of a king. Through Ruth's faithfulness, Boaz's integrity, and Naomi's perseverance, the lineage of David was established, and the hope of salvation was made manifest. As Ruth and Boaz watched their son grow, they understood that their story was far from over. Their act of kindness, their trust in God's plan, had set in motion a chain of events that would change the world. And though they may not have known it at the time, the child in Ruth's arms would one day be part of the greatest story ever told, the story of a Redeemer who would come to save all of humanity. In the quiet of Bethlehem, a legacy was born, one that would echo through the ages, forever reminding the world that redemption, restoration, and hope are always within reach when we trust in God's plan. As we reflect on the journey of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, we see the profound power of faith, loyalty, and redemption. From Ruth's unwavering commitment to her mother-in-law to Boaz's kindness and integrity, their story reminds us that even in times of hardship, there is always hope for a brighter future. Through their actions, we learn that when we place our trust in God's plan, even the most uncertain paths can lead to restoration and blessings beyond what we could ever imagine. Naomi's transformation from bitterness to joy shows us that healing is possible, even after the deepest of losses. And Ruth's journey from a foreign widow to a beloved wife and mother tells us that new beginnings can rise from the ashes of the past. Together, they embodied the true essence of love, resilience, and the belief that God is always at work, even when we can't see the full picture. As we end this chapter tonight, may the story of Ruth remind you that no matter where you are in your own life's journey, you are never truly alone. There is always hope, and there is always a way forward, even when the road seems uncertain. Thank you for joining me in this peaceful reflection. I hope it brought you a sense of calm and comfort. If you enjoyed this story, please feel free to come back for more peaceful moments and timeless tales. Until then, may you rest in peace, knowing that just as Ruth and Naomi found their redemption, so too can you find your peace. Good night and sleep well.